Hi, my name is Ilara, and for as long as I can remember, my world hasn't been defined by what I see or even what I hear, but by what I smell. Most people would call this a business, a brand, Leclerc Parfums, but to me it was never a company. It was a library of memories, a language spoken in scents. And I am, a storyteller. In the industry, they call someone like me a nose. I think of myself as a keeper of secrets. Today, I want to tell you a story. It's about a family legacy, a deep betrayal, and the difference between inheriting a fortune and inheriting true worth. My grandfather started Leclerc Parfums with nothing but a small copper still and a remarkable gift. He believed that a perfume wasn't just something you wear. He used to say it was bottled emotion. A single drop could be a first love, a summer rain, or a long-lost memory. He passed that belief and that gift down to my father, and my father, he passed it down to me. I remember when I was 8 years old. I couldn't have been any taller than the workbenches in our old perfumery. My brother Liam and my sister Chloe were outside playing, but I was always inside with Dad. He held out 2 small strips of paper. "Breathe in, Ilara," he'd say, his voice a low, warm hum. "Don't just smell, listen." One was jasmine, simple, but the other was different. It was jasmine too, but it had something else behind it, a note of damp earth, of night. I told him that. I said, "This one smells like the garden after it rains at midnight." I'll never forget the look on his face. It was pure pride. He explained that it was a rare jasmine that only bloomed under a full moon, and it carried the scent of the cool, wet soil it grew in. My brother saw flowers and saw a revenue projection. My sister saw flowers and saw a pretty picture for an advertisement. But Dad and me, we saw the story. That was my education. While my siblings were in business school, I was learning the art. I learned to identify over 3,000 individual scent notes. But more than that, I learned how to blend them, how to make them sing together. And our masterpiece, the heart of our entire company, was a perfume called Aura No. 7. It was my grandfather's first creation, and it accounted for nearly 80% of our company's revenue. It was a legend, but it was also a secret. I leaned forward slightly, her tone becoming more confidential, more intimate. The formula was written down, sure, a list of ingredients, but that paper, it's worthless. The real formula is a dance. It's a precise 3-day distillation process using the old antique copper stills my grandfather built by hand. They have quirks. They're alive in a way. You can't just set a timer. You have to feel the temperature on the copper. You have to know the exact moment the scent shifts from sharp to soft. You have to listen for the moment it's ready. And I was the only one my father ever taught. I was the only person alive who knew that dance. It wasn't a job. It wasn't a skill. It was my name, my history, my entire identity distilled into a single perfect bottle. It was a legacy of love. I thought that was enough. I thought that kind of love and knowledge was the most valuable thing in our family. That love, that shared understanding, it was the heart of Leclerc Parfums. But it wasn't the whole story, because there were 2 other members of my family, my older brother and sister, and they spoke a different language entirely. My brother, Liam, was our CEO. At least that was his title. For Liam, the world wasn't a garden of scents. It was a spreadsheet. He was brilliant with numbers. He could tell you the precise profit margin on a single bottle of Aura No. 7 down to the 3rd decimal point. He lived for quarterly reports and supply chain logistics. But he couldn't tell you the difference between a Bulgarian rose and a Turkish rose if his life depended on it. He didn't care. To him, our creations weren't art. They were units, inventory, assets. Then there was my sister Chloe, our head of marketing. If Liam's world was a spreadsheet, Chloe's was an Instagram feed. She was beautiful, charismatic, and she understood trends. She saw Leclerc perfumes not as a perfumery, but as a luxury lifestyle brand. She was obsessed with packaging, with influencers, with the image of success. She didn't really care what was inside the bottle, as long as the bottle looked good in the manicured hand of a celebrity. For years, the four of us existed in this delicate, often tense balance. They would push, and my father and I would have to push back. I remember one meeting so clearly. I can still feel the tension in the room. Liam came in, waving a printout, beaming with pride. He'd found a new synthetic vanillin, a chemical compound made in a lab. It was 100 times cheaper than the ethically sourced single-estate vanilla pods we imported from Madagascar. He said this could increase our net profit by 18%, like he just discovered gold. I was horrified. I tried to explain it to him as gently as I could. Liam, that stuff smells like a cheap car air freshener. It's flat. It has no soul, no warmth, no complexity. He just rolled his eyes. That was his signature move. Alara, honestly, 99% of customers will never know the difference. Before I could even respond, my dad, who had been silent, just placed a hand on my arm, and he looked at my brother and said, his voice calm but unshakable, Liam, we are the 1% that does know the difference. We don't sell car air fresheners. That was my dad, my protector. He was the wall that stood between my siblings' ambition and the soul of our company. Chloe was just as bad. Her big idea one year was Aura Light, a dumbed-down, chemically simplified version of Aura number 7 that we could mass produce and sell at huge department stores. Think of the volume, the market penetration, she'd argued with a full PowerPoint presentation. It felt like she was asking a master painter to start selling paint-by-numbers kits. They saw me as a bottleneck, a sentimental artist who was holding the company back from its true potential. They saw my dedication to quality as a financial flaw. My father's protection was the only thing that kept their business-first, art-last mentality from completely taking over. And then that wall began to crumble. That wall, my father, he had always seemed invincible to me, a constant presence, like the ancient oak tree that grew outside the perfumery. But even the strongest oaks eventually faced their final winter. It started slowly, a tremor in his hand that made it difficult for him to hold the delicate glass pipettes, a weariness in his eyes that I hadn't seen before. The doctors gave it a name, a diagnosis, but all I saw was my hero fading. His mind, once a brilliant encyclopedia of scents and formulas, began to wander. Some days he was sharp as ever. On others, he would get lost in the middle of a story. And as his strength waned, the atmosphere in the company, in our family, began to change. The balance of power shifted. It was like the sun was setting, and the creatures of the night were getting bolder. The whispers started. I have very sensitive hearing. It comes with the job, I guess. When you train your nose to pick up the faintest notes, you train your ears, too. I started catching fragments of conversations, hushed tones from behind my father's closed-door room. It was always Liam and Chloe. I'd be walking down the hall, and I'd hear Liam's voice, low and persuasive. Dad, you have to think about the future, the legacy. Ilara is a wonderful artist. Nobody is denying that. But this is a multi-million-dollar company. It needs a firm hand, a business mind. He made my passion sound like a childish hobby, like I was just playing with flower petals in a corner while the adults talked business. Chloe's approach was different, more subtle, more poisonous. She would play the part of the concerned daughter. Daddy, I'm worried about Ilara. She's so emotional. She gets so attached to these suppliers, these processes. The market is changing.
We can't be held back by sentimentality. She'll run the company into the ground trying to preserve a past that doesn't exist anymore. They were a team, a pincer movement. He was the logic, she was the emotion, and together they were painting me as a threat to the very legacy I was trying to protect. Her voice cracks slightly, and she takes a deep breath before continuing.
The hardest part was seeing it work. I started to see it in my father's eyes, a flicker of doubt. He would look at me differently. One afternoon, I was excitedly telling him about a new, sustainable source I'd found for a rare moss we used. It was more expensive, but the quality was unlike anything I'd ever smelled. In the old days, his eyes would have lit up. We would have spent hours talking about it, but this time, he just sighed. He looked so tired. Is it fiscally responsible, Ilara? He asked. He used Liam's words, fiscally responsible. That one question, it broke my heart more than any angry argument ever could. I realized they had gotten to him. They had planted a seed of fear in the one place I had always felt completely safe. They were twisting his love for me into a fear for the company's future. They were framing my devotion as a danger. I tried to fight back, of course. I tried to talk to him, but it was like trying to be heard in a storm. He was tired, he was sick, and he was being worn down by their constant, relentless whispering. The wall wasn't just crumbling anymore, it was being dismantled, brick by my own brother and sister, and I was about to be left completely exposed. My father passed away on a Tuesday in early spring. The perfumery was closed, the scent of lilies from the funeral arrangements hanging heavy and suffocating in the air. A week later, we were all gathered in the office of the family lawyer, a man I had known my whole life. The room felt wrong. The air was thick with this performance of grief. I could see Liam adjusting his tie, looking more like a businessman at a hostile takeover than a son mourning his father. Chloe was dabbing at her dry eyes with a silk handkerchief, a perfect picture of sorrow for an audience that wasn't there. I just felt numb. The lawyer, Mr. Davies, cleared his throat. He started reading the will. It was full of legal jargon, trusts, and clauses. I wasn't really listening. I assumed my father's final wishes would honor the truth, that Liam and Chloe would get their shares, of course, but that the soul of the company, the art, the perfumery itself, that would be my domain, my stewardship, my birthright. And then Mr. Davies got to the core of it. And so the entirety of the Leclerc Parfums Company, including all properties, assets, and intellectual capital, shall be placed in a trust to be managed jointly by my son, Liam Leclerc, and my daughter, Chloe Leclerc. Time seemed to slow down. I could hear the buzzing of the fluorescent lights above. I looked at Liam, and I saw it. The faintest, almost imperceptible smirk playing on his lips, a look of pure, unadulterated victory. I turned to Chloe. She met my gaze and gave me this look of pitiful, condescending sympathy, the kind of look you give to a wounded animal. The lawyer kept reading. And to my beloved daughter Ilara, for her artistic contributions, I bequeath a one-time cash payout of $500,000 as a gesture of my deepest love and to aid her in whatever new path she chooses. A gesture. Like I was a talented contractor being given a severance package. Not a daughter, not the heir to a century-old art form. Ilara looks directly into the lens. The hurt is gone, replaced by an icy calm. Everyone in that room expected me to break, to scream, to cry, to protest. I could feel their anticipation. But something else happened. It was like a switch flipped inside my head. All the grief, the shock, the white-hot rage, it froze. It solidified into something hard and clear as a diamond. In that moment, I saw them, not as my brother and sister, but as they truly were, two greedy strangers who had manipulated a dying man and stolen my life's work. And I knew that screaming would give them exactly what they wanted. It would prove their point that I was the emotional artist, too unstable to be in charge. So I did the one thing they didn't expect. I took a slow, deep breath. I looked from Liam's smirk to Chloe's fake pity. I straightened my back, and I said, my voice perfectly even, completely devoid of emotion, "I understand." I stood up, nodded politely to the lawyer, and walked out of that room without another word. The war was been lost, but my own battle was just beginning.
The next day, I went back to the perfumery one last time. It was a strange, out-of-body experience. It was my home, but it suddenly felt like a foreign country. Liam and Chloe were there, trying to look like they were in charge, pointing at things and using business terms they didn't understand. They expected me to make a scene. I could tell. They were tense, ready for a fight. But I gave them nothing. I just went to my small workshop, the heart of the building, and began to pack. I didn't sabotage anything. I would never. My respect for the craft, for the ingredients, for my father's memory, it runs too deep. I didn't smash a single beaker or corrupt a single file. I just packed what was truly mine. My personal journals, filled with years of my own experimental formulas and scent combinations, those were mine. My collection of rare scent oils that I had personally sourced from around the world, those were mine. The antique tools my grandfather had given me, mine. I was just finishing when Liam walked in, holding a clipboard. He looked uncomfortable, but he was trying to project authority. "Alara," he said, clearing his throat, "for the official handover, I'll need the formula book for Aura number 7 and any, operational notes." I almost laughed. Operational notes, like it was a machine. I turned, walked over to the old safe, and pulled out a beautiful leather-bound book. It was my father's handwriting. Inside, it listed these 17 ingredients for Aura number 7. I held it for a moment, then handed it to him. "Here you go, Liam," I said. He took it like it was the key to the kingdom. He actually patted it. "Great," he said. "All business. Thank you for your cooperation." I just smiled. A polite, empty, hollow smile. And I said, "Good luck," because I knew what he didn't. That book was useless. It was like handing a grocery list to a child and expecting them to cook a Michelin-starred meal. The real formula wasn't on the page. It was in the air. It was in the sound the copper still makes just before the temperature is perfect. It was in the feel of the steam on your skin. It was in the timing, the intuition, the years of muscle memory. It was in me. I walked out of that building, leaving them with their book, their assets, and their empty brand. They thought they had won. They had no idea they had just locked themselves into a beautiful museum where they didn't know how to turn the lights on.
The check for $500,000 arrived a week later. It felt like blood money, but I cashed it. I used a portion of it to lease a small, sunlit workshop in a quiet part of town. For the first time in my life, there were no spreadsheets, no marketing meetings, no one telling me my passion was a liability. There was just me and the scents. And it was peaceful. I felt a sense of freedom I hadn't realized I'd lost. I started creating again, but this time just for me. About a month passed. I was working on a new blend, something with notes of citrus and sea salt that reminded me of my own newfound freedom. And then my phone rang. It was Liam. His voice was clipped, annoyed. "Alara, we've run the first new batch of Aura. It's off." He paused. "It smells, I don't know, burnt?" he said, the frustration clear in his voice. "And flat. Did you leave the right calibration settings on the main still before you left?" I looked at the audience. A small, knowing smile playing on my lips for the first time.
It took everything in me not to laugh out loud. The calibration settings. He thought it was a button, a dial. He had no idea. I let the silence hang for a moment. Then I said, my voice as calm and neutral as a clear sky, I left everything exactly as it was, Liam. The notes are all there. Well, something's wrong, he snapped. The clients are going to notice. I'm sure you'll figure it out. And then I ended the call. What I didn't tell him, of course, was that the main still, the old custom-built copper heart of the operation, had to be calibrated by hand. After every single distillation, its temperature and pressure balance would shift slightly. You had to run a small test batch, smell it, and make tiny, intuitive adjustments to the valves. It was a process that had taken my father 20 years to perfect and 10 years to teach me. Liam and Chloe had the recipe, but they didn't have the relationship. They didn't know the dance. And the first note of their new empire was already turning sour.
That first call was just the overture. The symphony of panic began a few weeks later. The first disaster was with a new batch. They must have tried to rush it or force the temperature. They didn't just make a bad batch, they created a scorched chemical sludge that was completely unsalvageable. Worse, the intense heat warped the main valve on the copper still. The heart of the company was now wounded. Then Chloe called. Her voice was high-pitched, frantic. Ilara, the Four Seasons just rejected our entire shipment. They said it doesn't smell like Aura number 7. They're threatening to cancel our contract. This is a disaster. I just said, that's a shame, Chloe. I hope you sort it out. The final straw came from a place they had never even considered. Our main supplier for a rare night-blooming orchid, a key ingredient, was a small family farm in Ecuador. I had known them for 15 years. We weren't just business partners, we were friends. Liam called them to place an order, and they refused. They told him their contract and their loyalty were with me, Ilara Leclaim, not some new management at a company they no longer trusted. That's when everything broke. My phone rang again. It was Liam. But this wasn't the annoyed CEO from the first call. This was a broken man. Ilara, he said, his voice cracking. There was no preamble. Please. I was silent. I let him stew in it. We were wrong. He finally choked out, the words tasting like poison in his mouth. Okay, we were wrong. We can't do this without you. The brand is worthless. The company is worthless without you. He was rambling now, the desperation pouring out of him. Please, come back. We'll tear up the will. We'll make you an equal partner. CEO, whatever you want, just name your price. I let him finish his entire pathetic speech. I let the silence stretch out, and I could hear his ragged breathing on the other end of the line. And then I spoke. My voice was quiet, but it was not weak. The company, I asked, as if I was clarifying a minor point. Oh, you mean my inheritance? He was silent. I said, you can keep it. And then, for the first time in my life, I hung up the phone on my brother. That was the last time I ever spoke to either of them. I heard later that they tried to sell the company, but once potential buyers did their due diligence and realized the core formula was essentially lost, the value plummeted. They were left with an empty brand name and some expensive, silent machinery. They inherited a beautiful cage and had thrown away the only songbird that knew how to sing. And me? This is my life now. I took what was left of my payout and I built this. Just me. I started my own line under my own name, Ilara. At first, it was just me selling bottles at a local market, but people responded. They responded to the quality, the honesty, the story in every bottle. Last year, I won the industry's most prestigious award for my new perfume, Phoenix. It has notes of citrus, sea salt, and just a hint of wood smoke and ash. A new beginning rising from the enders of the old. I'm not a multi-million-dollar corporation. I don't want to be. I'm an artist. I'm a business owner, and I'm happy.
I'm respected for who I am, not for a brand name I was born into. I learned a very hard lesson. Sometimes the people closest to you can't see your value. They'll try to measure you with their own broken rulers and tell you you don't measure up. They'll look at your passion and call it a flaw. They'll look at your unique gift and call it a liability. My siblings inherited buildings and bank accounts, but I realized I inherited the true fortune. I carry it with me every day. It's the knowledge my father gave me. It's the passion my grandfather ignited. It's the art that lives in my hands and in my soul. And that is an inheritance that no one can ever take away from you. So I want to ask you something. What is your unique gift? What is that special knowledge or passion that only you have? Don't ever let anyone devalue it. Don't ever let anyone make you feel like it's not enough. It is your true worth. Own it, protect it, and never, ever apologize for it. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever felt undervalued or have a story of your own, please share it in the comments below. I'd love to read them. And if you enjoyed this, please consider liking and subscribing for more stories.